Natural Bridge has been a sacred site for longer than anyone has been keeping records. The Monacan people knew it first, called it the Bridge of God, incorporated it into their spiritual life in ways that the written record cannot fully recover, because the written record of the Monacan people was kept by other people and filtered through other people's understanding of what they were seeing. Thomas Jefferson bought it in 1774 and called it the most sublime of nature's works and had a cabin built nearby so he could sit with it. George Washington surveyed it as a young man and carved his initials into the limestone, which you can still see if you know where to look. For 2.5 centuries, it was a private attraction. Admission charged, visitors managed, the site operated as a destination for people who wanted to stand under 215 feet of natural limestone arch spanning 90 feet above Cedar Creek and feel whatever it was the site produced in human beings who stood under it and looked up. In 2016, it became a state park. The infrastructure changed. The old hotel demolished, the grounds reconfigured, the interpretive programming updated. What didn't change was the arch itself, which had been there for something like 500 million years and was not going to be reconfigured by the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. And what didn't change, though it would take the park's newest interpretive guide 3 months to understand this, was the figure on the arch. Her name was Jolene Marsh, and she had taken the job at Natural Bridge State Park in May because she needed the work and because she had grown up in Rockbridge County and had been to the site a dozen times as a child and knew the place well enough to talk about it, which was the primary qualification for an interpretive guide. She was 27 years old, a year out of a history degree from W&L that she was still figuring out what to do with, and she had the quality that made a good interpretive guide. Genuine interest in the things she was explaining, the ability to read a crowd and adjust accordingly, and a voice that carried without effort in an outdoor setting. The job was straightforward. Meet visitor groups at the visitor center, walk them down the trail to the arch, deliver the interpretive program, the geology, the history, the cultural significance, and field questions. 6 tours a day in peak season, fewer in the shoulder months. The trail was 1/3 of a mile. The arch was unmistakable, the program was established and well documented, and she had it memorized in 2 weeks. She noticed the figure for the first time in her 3rd week. She was finishing a tour, a family group, 2 adults and 3 children, the children at the age where geological timescales were simultaneously incomprehensible and thrilling. And she had reached the end of the program and was standing under the arch looking up at it while the family took photographs, because looking up at the arch never got old regardless of how many times you'd done it. The arch was always itself, massive, improbable, the limestone warm in the afternoon light, Cedar Creek running below it with the sound it had been making for longer than human habitation of the continent. She looked up and saw someone standing on top of the arch. Not a maintenance worker. She knew the park's maintenance schedule, and there was no work planned on the arch, and the access for maintenance was not casual, not something a person just climbed up to. A figure standing at the highest point of the arch, looking down. The distance was such that she could not make out features, just the shape of a person, upright, still, looking down at the group of visitors below. She looked at the family. They were looking at their photographs. None of them were looking up. She looked back at the top of the arch. The figure was gone. She noted it and moved on. The second time was the following Tuesday. Different tour group, a school group from Lexington, 22 middle schoolers and 3 chaperones. The controlled chaos of 22 12-year-olds encountering geological time for the first time. She had gotten good at school groups, at calibrating the program for the attention span and the vocabulary and the specific humor that landed with that age. She was in the middle of the geological section, the formation of the arch from a cave system, the Cedar Creek cutting down through the limestone over millions of years, when she saw the figure again. Same position, top of the arch, the highest point, standing and looking down. Still enough that it could have been a feature of the rock if she hadn't known every feature of the arch's profile by then. She watched it through the rest of her program. It did not move. When the school group moved on and she lingered under the arch for the 30 seconds she usually allowed herself between tours, she looked up, and the figure was gone. She mentioned it to her supervisor, a man named Glenn Forrest, who had been at the park since before it was a state park, back when it was still a private attraction. She described what she'd seen in neutral terms: a person on top of the arch, twice now, there when the group was present and gone when they left. Glenn listened without expression. Then he said, "What did it look like?" "A person," she said, "standing. I couldn't make out detail from that distance." Glenn was quiet for a moment. What direction was it facing? She thought about this. "Down," she said. "It was looking down at the group." Glenn nodded slowly. He had the manner of a man receiving information that confirmed something he already knew. "How long have you been doing tours?" he asked. 3 weeks. "It usually takes longer," he said, "to notice." She looked at him. "You know about it." "I know about it. Most of the long-term staff do." He paused. "We don't put it in the interpretive program." "What is it?" Glenn looked out the window of the visitor center at the trail leading down to the arch. "I've been here 22 years, he said. "I've seen it more times than I can count. I've talked to people who were here before me who saw it too." He paused. "I don't know what it is. I know what it does." "What does it do?" "It watches the visitors," he said. "Every tour group, every one I've ever observed it with. It appears when the group arrives under the arch, and it goes when the group leaves." He looked at her. "In 22 years, I have never seen it do anything else." "Until?" she said, because his phrasing had implied an until. Glenn was quiet for a long moment. "There was one night, 7 years ago, security camera footage, which is why I'm telling you this instead of just telling you it's probably a trick of light." He paused. "It came down." He showed her the security camera footage that afternoon on his office computer. The camera covered the arch from the visitor platform, a fixed wide angle, the kind of footage that captured the arch and the creek and the surrounding area in the flat gray of night vision recording. The timestamp was from October, 7 years ago, 2:17 in the morning. The footage showed the arch empty for the first 4 minutes of the clip. Then, at the 4-minute mark, the figure appeared at the top of the arch, not arriving, not climbing up, simply present where it had not been a frame before. It stood at the top of the arch for 11 minutes without moving. Then, it descended. Not climbed down, descended, the word Glenn used and the only accurate word for what the footage showed. It moved down the face of the arch in a way that was not the movement of a person climbing, not the careful foot-by-foot negotiation of a vertical surface. It moved the way water moves down a surface, continuous and unhurried, maintaining contact with the stone without the mechanics of climbing. It reached the base of the arch at the creek level, and the night vision camera lost it in the shadow of the vegetation along the bank. It did not reappear on the camera. Jolene watched the footage twice. What happened that night? Was anyone here? The park was closed, no visitors, no staff on site. The security system flagged the motion and the footage was reviewed the following morning. He paused. Nothing was disturbed, no evidence of anything on the arch or the bank. The creek was running normally. so it came down and nothing happened. As far as we know, as far as the physical evidence showed. He paused again, in the way he paused when he was deciding how much to say. The ranger who reviewed the footage that morning filed a report and then requested a transfer to another park. He was gone by the end of the week. I've talked to him once since then. He's at Shenandoah now, and he won't discuss that morning. What did he see in the footage that you're not showing me? Glenn looked at her steadily. I'm showing you everything that was on the camera. What he saw that morning that I didn't see, I don't know. I've watched that footage 100 times and I see what you see. Whatever he saw it once, and once was enough. Jolene looked at the frozen last frame of the footage. The arch, the creek, the shadows along the bank. Nothing on the arch. Nothing visible anywhere. Does it only come down at night? In 22 years, I've only seen it come down the once. On the footage. He paused. I don't know what changed that night. I've thought about it for 7 years and I don't know. She spent the summer noticing, not looking. She was careful about the distinction, because looking was an active thing that changed the quality of your attention, and she needed her attention for the tours, for the visitors, for the program. But noticing, the peripheral awareness of a person who knows what to look for and lets it register without directing focus at it. She noticed the figure on approximately 60% of her tours. Not every time, but often enough to establish a pattern. It appeared when the group was fully assembled under the arch. It disappeared when the group began to move. She noticed things about it that she hadn't noticed in the first weeks. It was not always in the same position. It favored the highest point of the arch, but on some days it was lower on the curve, closer to the edges, in a position she could only account for by imagining it had moved along the arch between tours. It was always facing down, always still, always watching the visitors below. She noticed that it did not appear on solo visits. When she walked the trail alone, off hours, it was not there. She verified this a dozen times. It appeared for groups. It appeared for people. She began to construct a theory in the way that a history degree and a careful temperament produced theories, provisionally, with awareness of its limitations. The arch had been a sacred site for a very long time. Sacred sites accumulated attention over generations, the sustained focus of human beings engaging with a place as spiritually significant, the centuries of ceremony and prayer, and the specific quality of regard that a people brings to a place they consider holy. Perhaps what she was seeing was that accumulated attention made somehow visible. The watching that had been done at this site for centuries made manifest in a form that positioned itself where watchers had always positioned themselves, at the highest point, looking down at the people below. She did not find this theory comforting exactly, but she found it more manageable than the alternatives, and she held it through the summer and into the fall. The theory stopped being manageable in October. The school group was from Buena Vista. 43 high school students, 4 teachers, 2 parent chaperones. A large group, larger than she usually managed alone, but the park was short-staffed that week, and Glenn had asked her to take it, and she had. She had modified the program for the group size, structured it to keep the students moving and engaged, and it had gone well. The good kind of school group, genuinely interested, asking good questions. The kind of tour that reminded her why she'd taken the job. They were at the end of the program, the group assembled under the arch for the final portion when the student closest to her, a girl in the front of the group, 15 or 16, the one who had been asking the best questions all tour, looked up at the top of the arch and said, "Who's that?" Jolene looked up. The figure was there, as it usually was, in its usual position, still, watching. "I don't see anyone," said one of the teachers, looking up. "Right there, the girl said. "At the top, standing there." Jolene looked at the teacher, and the teacher looked at Jolene, and the teacher did not see it, and Jolene did, and the girl did. And in the 43 students assembled under the arch, 3 others were now pointing up and saying, "Right there, at the top, don't you see it?" 4 students out of 43. Jolene and the girl and 3 others. The teachers and the remaining students looked at the top of the arch and saw nothing. The girl looked at Jolene. "You see it too," she said. It wasn't a question. Jolene made the decision in under a second, the way you make certain decisions when the alternative is worse. "I see a shadow formation that can look like a figure in this light," she said. "It's a common optical effect at the arch. The limestone creates shadows that the eye reads as shapes." She said it smoothly, professionally, with the confidence of someone who had been delivering interpretive content for 6 months. The girl looked at her for a moment. Then she looked back up at the arch. "It moved," the girl said, quietly, just to Jolene. Jolene looked up. The figure had moved. It was lower on the arch than its usual position, closer to the edge, in a place she had not seen it before. Still facing down, still watching. Watching the girl. She ended the tour efficiently and walked the group back to the visitor center, and she was professional and calm the entire way. And when the buses pulled out of the parking lot, she sat down on a bench outside the visitor center and put her hands on her knees and breathed. She went back to the arch that night. She did not fully plan this. It was not a decision she made in advance and thought through. It was the decision of a person who has been half-knowing something for 6 months and has finally been given the piece that makes the half-knowledge complete, and who understands that the next step is to go look at it directly rather than peripherally. She had the park access code. She had a flashlight. She drove back after dark and walked the trail alone and stood under the arch in the October night. The arch was dark above her, the limestone catching the ambient light of a half-moon, the creek running in the dark to her left. She could not see the top of the arch from where she stood. The curve of it blocked the view of the highest point. She moved to the side, to the angle that she knew from 6 months of tours gave the best view of the arch's full profile, and she looked up. The figure was there. Not at the top, lower, on the face of the arch, in a position she had not seen it occupied during daylight hours. Lower than it had been during the afternoon tour, lower than she had ever seen it, as if it had been descending gradually through the hours since the last visitor group had left, making its way down the face of the arch in the unhurried, continuous way she had seen in the security footage. She stood under the arch in the October dark and looked at it, and it looked at her. Or she assumed it looked at her because it was facing down and she was below it, and she was the only person there. She thought about the security footage and the ranger who had reviewed it and requested a transfer and would not talk about what he had seen. She thought about Glenn's 22 years of watching it watch visitors and the one night it had come down. She thought about the girl on the afternoon tour pointing up and saying it moved in the quiet voice of someone reporting something real. She thought about what it meant to be a sacred site, to be a place where people had come for centuries to be in the presence of something larger than themselves, to be a place that had been watched over for that long by something that positioned itself at the highest point and looked down at the people below. She thought about what watching meant, what it was for. She said, "What are you looking for?" She said it clearly, at a normal volume, the way she would ask a question during a tour. Not a summoning, not a supplication, a question, the kind she'd been asking for 6 months peripherally and was now asking directly. The figure moved. Not down, sideways, along the face of the arch to a position that she registered with a full-body certainty as directly above her. It stopped there. It was very still. And then, in the way that things become clear when you have been looking at them long enough and from the right angle, she understood what it was doing. It wasn't watching the visitors. It was watching over them. The difference was a preposition and everything. She stood under the arch for a long time after that. The creek ran. The half-moon moved in the sky. The figure remained above her, still, in the position it had taken when she asked her question and stayed in when she had her answer. When she finally walked back up the trail to the parking lot, she looked back once at the arch. The figure was at the top again, the highest point, the position it occupied during the tours, back where it watched from, watching over. She drove home to Lexington and went to bed and slept without difficulty for the first time in 6 months. She is still at Natural Bridge State Park. She is in her 3rd year now, the longest-serving interpretive guide on the staff, the one the newer guides come to when they have questions about the arch and the program and the things they're starting to notice that aren't in the program. She tells them what Glenn told her, approximately, that some of the long-term staff are aware of it, that it appears with visitor groups and goes when they leave, that it has been there as long as anyone has been looking. She shows them the security footage from 7 years ago because she thinks they deserve to know. She tells them that in 3 years she has never seen it do anything that seemed threatening, which is true, and which she means as reassurance, and which she also recognizes is not the same as knowing what it is or what it wants. What she does not tell them is what she understood under the arch on the October night, the shift from watching to watching over, the difference a preposition makes. She does not tell them because she is not certain she can convey it accurately, and because the understanding she arrived at that night was hers, and arrived the way certain understandings arrive, through the specific combination of 6 months of attention and one direct question, and the patience to stand still long enough for the answer to become clear. What she tells them is look up. When you're under the arch with a group, look up. Pay attention to what you see. She tells them it's been there a very long time. It was there before the park, and before the hotel, and before Jefferson, and before any written record of this place. It will be there after all of those things. She tells them the Monacan called it the Bridge of God. Think about what that means. Think about what it implies about what might have been here when they named it that. She tells them, look up. Most of them see it, eventually. Most of them are all right.